Hola! Today I thought I'd do a video about my favorite cartoons. Keep in mind this is not everything that I like. This is just kind of the top ones. And it doesn't include like the golden age of cartoons like, Popeye and Looney Tunes and things like that. I like a lot of those too. This is more the television variety. First I'd like to start with a few honorable mentions that are not part of my top 10. The first one would be something I discovered recently. It's called Conan the Adventurer. I never really knew this show existed and discovered it recently. And Conan's not his usual self that you would know from the stories or the comics or even the previous films, but it's a nice way to introduce kids to the Hyborian world and the adventures that he has. Animation-wise, it's kind of a cross between G.I. Joe and He-Man. Here's the second volume here. You can kind of see the main villain in it, Rothamon, kind of looks like Serpentor. But it's a fun show. It's a good show for kids to get into Conan without being too scary. And they travel all over the world, which is nice. They go to Stygia and everywhere you can think of. So that's a good one. Another honorable mention is Transformers. Who doesn't like Transformers? I mean, come on. It's wonderful voice work, lots of action. Since it was robots, they could really kind of beat each other up and shoot each other, and so that's cool. And then just for nostalgia's sake, Super Friends. Who doesn't like the Super Friends? I mean, it's a kid show. It's corny. It's plot holes from hell, but it's still fun. I love the voices, and man, there is something about that Wonder Woman. I don't know, that version of Wonder Woman does it for me. I don't know what that says about me, but it says something. Anyway, so on to my top 10. Number 10 would be the 90s X-Men cartoon. The funny thing about this is there's actually aspects of it that disappoint me, and that's the fact that Nightcrawler and Colossus are not in it. Or Kitty Pryde, at least not as continuing team members. That was kind of a disappointment. I think the reason for that was because at the time in the 90s they were in a comic called Excalibur. They were not in the main team, so they didn't want people who watched the cartoon to be confused if they went and bought the comic. Would have loved to have Nightcrawler and Colossus as part of the Dark Phoenix saga, but there you go. It has stories from the 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s all mixed together. Moments from the comic books are just amazing that I really liked. You find them in here. And I believe this was 5 volumes. So they crammed a lot of episodes on one disc, usually like 8 or 7 episodes per disc. So good effort there. No bonus features. So then number 9 would be Dungeons and Dragons, which lasted for 3 seasons in the early to mid 80s. This was another show that was funny. I convinced myself I didn't like it because it was a kiddie thing and nobody was really stabbing each other or fighting each other. It was made for kids, and yet I watched it all the time. I bought this box set when it came out a few years ago, and I found that I really loved the voice work. The voice acting was phenomenal. Plus, it's really nice just to see a lot of the creatures from Dungeons and Dragons moving around, the Shadow Demon and the goblins, and just the way they interacted was fun. And it's kind of this hybrid kind of American anime style of animation that kind of works for me. This particular set is out of print, but I think it's Mill Creek Entertainment has put another volume out that has all the episodes with no bonus features like this one has, and some restored music. This has some music that's changed in it, and that really pissed some folks off. But anyway, Dungeons and Dragons, another good effort. Number 8 would be something I can't show you. I don't have a video for you. Is Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. They have not released these on video in the United States in any form, which is a shame. Maybe they'll do that with the new movie coming out. That would be great. I love Firestar. That was her first appearance. They eventually took her and put her in the comics. I like Iceman. I like how they used his power. I've gone and watched some of the episodes on YouTube, and it's a lot of fun. The music is very disco-y. Firestar was cool because it was almost like Mary Jane having superpowers. They patterned her kind of after Mary Jane, the way she looks. So that's kind of an interesting idea to look at. That was number 8. Number 7 is Mighty Mouse, The New Adventures. I was actually older when this came out. It was really weird. It was kind of surreal. A lot of times there wasn't even really a superhero thing. It was just bizarre. And later on I found out that it was Ralph Bakshi who was the producer of the show, and then also John Crick-Falusi. So if you're familiar with Ren and Stimpy, then this kind of makes sense because this is a similar animation style, but it still is geared towards kids, so it doesn't have some really gross out humor. So no nose goblins in this one. So you like the humor, but you don't like the grossness. This is a good show for you. 2 seasons it lasted on 3 discs on this set. Unfortunately, the show was killed because of a cocaine snorting controversy. I actually have the newspaper somewhere. I saved it all these years, but it was on the cover page. It looked like he was snorting cocaine. He snorted some crushed flowers or something, and parents complained, and then it hobbled on one more season, and then it was canceled, which is unfortunate because it's a really fun show. You can see on the back there, you've got some of the same style as Ren and Stimpy. Yeah, that's an Elvis blimp, and then where's one of my favorite guys right there, the cow, who kind of sounds like George C. Scott. Fun show. Not to be confused with The New Adventures of Mighty Mouse. This is Mighty Mouse, The New Adventures. The New Adventures of Mighty Mouse was a Filmation show. This is another show. Okay, number 6. I don't actually have something to show you either. I have this Saturday Morning Cartoons Volume 1 because it has an episode of Filmation's Tarzan on it, which I really enjoyed. It was fantastic. It had a lot of the elements of Burroughs' books, science fiction, fantasy, adventure, lost cities, great music. My only complaint about it all these years later, besides the fact that it hasn't been released on DVD, it almost was. I talked to the guy who was doing those Filmation sets they put out years ago, and something happened with the rights, and I think that something was Disney because they challenged it because they had the rights to their version of Tarzan and they didn't want anybody putting out any other version. That's a way to capture old rights, folks. The one thing about the show that's kind of annoying now, all these years later, is it's Tarzan. It's supposed to be Africa, despite all the lost worlds and aliens and bizarre creatures and jungle stuff. It's Africa, and there's like no Africans in it. So that's kind of annoying. But if you can get past that, it's a fun show. The next show, number 5, would be The Tick. The Tick is great at poking fun at all the tropes of the superhero genre. Back when poking fun at the superhero tropes was relatively new, so it's fun. It's based on the comic book of the same name. Although I think it's better than the comic. The storytelling's better. They created some new characters for the show that I really like American Maid and Fledermaus and Sewer Urchin and things like that. So that's fun. Unfortunately, they only released the first 2 seasons on DVD. They didn't release the 3rd. And they also cut out an episode of each of the 2 seasons they did release. But this is what we got. Good stuff. Check it out. So the next one would be number 4, and number 4 would be another effort by Filmation, Flash Gordon. This was a good show. This was came out in 79 and 1980. The first season is phenomenal. It's actually the first animated Flash Gordon that we get, animated show. And the first season is done like it's a serial. Everything's connected and picks up from the cliffhanger from the last episode. Interestingly enough, the show came out of another show. I think it was called My Greatest Adventure, which was a show about Flash Gordon fighting Hitler and Hitler working with Ming the Merciless and all that. But that has never been released. But when they blast off from Earth, that's like part of that show. So it's strange. I love the animation of this. There's some wonderful rotoscoping of spaceships. It's very true to the original Flash Gordon cartoon, comic strip, but it's much better than the film that came out about the same time, which made fun of the genre. This doesn't make fun of the genre. What happened is it kind of comes to a screeching halt in the second season because the network didn't like the fact that it was you had to show them in order. And so they were very down on that. So they did more bottle shows, kind of 2 small shows per episode, and they made it for younger kids. They added a dragon, I think his name's Gremlin. And the first time I watched it, I zipped through the first season, started watching the second season, and lost interest. Eventually went back because some of the same characters show up. So the first season's excellent. Well worth it. Flash Gordon. Number 3 used to be my second favorite show of all time, but it is dropped when I really thought about things and analyzed things. And it is another Filmation show, Black Star. Now, Black Star might be classified as Sword and Planet, planetary romance. It's about an astronaut that goes to a strange alien world and then, fights for freedom and justice. One thing I really like about it is it's very generic. I mean, it's just like the kitchen sink is flown in. At one point, you have a giant creature that looks like a Japanese robot, and then you get mutants, and he's got this dragon creature here, but he's an astronaut, and then you got the Trobbits. Yeah, they're kind of annoying, but they still have their own personalities. They're kind of a cross between hobbits and the Seven Dwarfs. And that was the cruel overlord there. The cruel overlord, the overlord, that's the overlord. I just love the genericness of it. It's kind of a dress rehearsal for He-Man, but I think it's a better show than He-Man. I like the thinner, non-steroid, kind of more Conan-looking kind of John Blackstar. Anyway, number 3, Black Star. Number 2 would be the 1990s Spider-Man. I'm sure hoping they put the whole box set of this out on DVD. I didn't really see much of this when it came out. I had to watch it later. I loved it. It's really a great, nice mix of what was going on at that time in Spider-Man, pulling various stories from the years that before. I love their depiction of the Hobgoblin. You can see him right there. Mark Hamill did the voice of the Hobgoblin. It was wonderful. The storyline turns out a little bit different than it was in the comics, but who cares? And I love the continuing saga. Characters that came before, they show up later. They figured people were sophisticated enough to enjoy it, to get it. There's some episodes where they go to alternate realities. I love that kind of stuff. They handle the Venom thing pretty well in the alien suit, much better than they did in the film. They should have gone with the idea that they did here, So they even do Secret Wars, a version of that, which is better than the comics for the most part. So Spider-Man, the 90s episodes. Love this show. Then what's my number 1 favorite cartoon of all time? Of course, it's Thundar the Barbarian. Yes, I love Thundar. I've always loved Thundar. When this came out on DVD, you had to order it online. You couldn't get it in the stores. I was overjoyed. It's bare bones. It doesn't have any special features, but it's great. I just can't talk enough about it. When I started looking into the show, it made sense why I liked it so much. There's so many comic book creators that worked on it. Steve Gerber, Alex Toth, Jack Kirby worked on this show, so it has a very comic book feel to it. I really like that. There's elements of Commandy and the Gamma Knights. I mean, it's ridiculous, of course. 2,000 years and people are still wearing the same clothes. They're just a little bit raggedy and things like that. But who cares? I love the mixture of fantasy and science fiction and post-apocalyptic destruction and heroics. It's too bad that at the time Steve Gerber couldn't show somebody getting killed or at least show some real fighting. The networks were really down on that. That's ultimately why the show was canceled and we only got 2 seasons. But man, What, 2 seasons? And I love the voice work in this too. Great stuff. I love Robert Ridgely, I think is his name, does Thundar. He also did Flash Gordon. And then Nellie Bellflower, I think is you say your name. I love her as Ariel. God, I love Ariel. I love me some Ariel. Look at that. Just Ariel was just awesome. I love her magic powers. I love the things she says, the way she speaks. And there's just little things in there. They use there's little nods to other shows. There's like nods to The Thing, because there's an episode where they're kind of in the snowy Arctic area and an alien comes down and tries to abduct people, and the mutants and the weird creatures and stuff. You know, when I was young, at first I thought this was actually a show adapting. When I first saw it, I thought it was a show adapting Gamma World, the role-playing game, which I loved at that time. So that's another thing. It was like, oh, this is the closest we'll ever get to having a Gamma World cartoon, so that was cool. It's not like Star Wars at all. It's like comic books. That's my big complaint about what people say. It's like, it's just ripping off Star Wars. If it rips off anything, it rips off more of like Flash Gordon, weird alien planet, and John Carter of Mars. It's kind of like a John Carter of Mars on a post-apocalyptic Earth. So anyway, that's my favorite show, Thundar. Incidentally, like I said, it's bare bones. There's no special features. But on the Saturday Morning 1980s box set, they do have a documentary. I have a sneaky suspicion that this short doc was supposed to originally go on that. And they threw it on here and then didn't manage to get it on there. But anyway, so if you want to see a documentary about it, which doesn't really talk about Steve Gerber, so that's kind of lame, but it does have one on here. You can pick this up as well. Another honorable mention is Transformers. Who doesn't like Transformers? I mean, come on. It's wonderful voice work, lots of action. Since it was robots, they could really kind of beat each other up and shoot each other, and so that's cool. And then just for nostalgia's sake, Super Friends. Who doesn't like the Super Friends? I mean, it's a kid show. It's corny. It's plot holes from hell, but it's still fun. I love the voices. And man, there is something about that Wonder Woman. I don't know, that version of Wonder Woman does it for me. They went and bought the comic. Would have loved to have Nightcrawler and Colossus as part of the Dark Phoenix saga, but there you go. It has stories from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s all mixed together. Moments from the comic books are just amazing that I really liked. You find them in here. And I believe this was 5 volumes. So they crammed a lot of episodes on one disc, usually like 8 or 7 episodes per disc. So good effort there. No bonus features. So then number 9 would be Dungeons and Dragons, which lasted for I don't know what that says about me, but it says something. Anyway, so on to my top 10. Number 10 would be the 90s X-Men cartoon. The funny thing about this is there's actually aspects of it that disappoint me, and that's the fact that Nightcrawler and Colossus are not in it, or Kitty Pryde, at least not as continuing team members. That was kind of a disappointment. I think the reason for that was because at the time in the 90s, they were in a comic called Excalibur. They were not in the main team, so they didn't want people who watched the cartoon to be confused. Hola! Today I thought I'd do a video about my favorite cartoons. Keep in mind, this is not everything that I like. This is just kind of the top ones. And it doesn't include like the golden age of cartoons like, Popeye and Looney Tunes and things like that. I like a lot of those too. This is more the television variety. First, I'd like to start with a few honorable mentions that are not part of my top 10. The first one would be something I discovered recently. It's called Conan the Adventurer. I never really knew this show existed and discovered it recently. And Conan's not his usual self that you would know from the stories or the comics or even the previous films, but it's a nice way to introduce kids to the Hyborian world. and the adventures that he has. Animation-wise, it's kind of a cross between G.I. Joe and He-Man. Here's the second volume here. You can kind of see the main villain in it, Rothamon, kind of looks like Serpentor. But it's a fun show. It's a good show for kids to get into Conan without being too scary. And they travel all over the world, which is nice. They go to Stygia and everywhere you can think of. So that's a good one.